Good evening, ladies and gentlemen and councillors. Shortly before 1 o'clock this morning, on this morning a year ago, in a residential tower block in North Kensington, an horrendous fire broke out. I'd like to start this meeting by asking everybody to stand and observe a minute's silence for the victims of the Grenfell Tower tragedy. So, apologies for absence. Councillor Emma Toll apologises for her absence. Are there any declarations of interest? No declarations of interest, thank you. Are we happy to approve that the minutes on pages 3 to 7 are a fair reflection of our last meeting?
Agreed.
Thank you. And are there any matters arising from those minutes? Thank you. Right, I understand we have a written question from a member of the public. Ms. Sheila Sullivan. Ms. Sullivan, are you happy for your question to be taken as read, or would you like to speak?
I would like to read it out.
Please do.
The Housing Act 2004 provided for licensing schemes for housing of multiple occupation to be operated on a revenue-neutral basis at no cost to the public purse. The costs of running the schemes, including enforcement, were to be covered by income from the licence fees. A neighbour of mine has recently received an email from an environmental health officer explaining that they have a waiting list of over 100 suspected unlicensed HMOs to be investigated. The explanation given is that resources are limited. Any tenants in these properties would not have the protection that licensing provides and may be at risk. What action will Harlow Council take to clear this backlog of enforcement as soon as possible and ensure resources are adequate for the future?
Thank you, Chair. In response to Mrs Sullivan's question, resources made available through licensing fees and charges are deployed to administer the licensing regime, including taking progressive and proportionate enforcement action in accord with the Council's enforcement policy where this is appropriate. Concerns about possible HMOs raised by members of the public are quite properly recorded by the Environmental Health Team. Amongst the information collected, and each inquiry is followed up. Experience demonstrates that the great majority of such inquiries, when investigated, relate to dwellings which do not meet the statutory definition of a HMO. But there will always be a certain number of such lines of inquiry to follow up in any enforcement regime, and the number of inquiries to be followed up should not be equated with an estimate of outstanding enforcement action. Resources allocation across all enforcement functions is kept under review to ensure that it remains in balance with the Council priorities.
Do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, I would just like to ask if the council also has a waiting list of in licence application to be dealt with. Is that very long too?
I'm sure I can supply within 7 days, Mrs Sullivan, the exact number of licence applications that we have on Harlow Council. I don't have the figure, obviously not knowing the supplementary question. I don't have the figure with me now, but I will guarantee that Mrs Sullivan will receive an answer within 7 days.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 6, written questions from councillors. I understand we have a written question from Councillor Harlow. Councillor Harlow, do you want to take your questions read or do you want to speak it?
This is for Danny Purton, Portfolio Holder for Environment. What additional arrangements has he put in place to encourage a meaningful response from residents of Harlow to the current Regulation 19 consultation on the local plan? I am sure he will agree that just over 120 responses to the Regulation 18 consultation was really not adequate or a proper representation of the views of the residents, and the council really should do better to promote consultation and ensure residents can better understand the local plan and easily be able to provide their comments.
Thank you, Chair. I intend to answer the question up until the question mark, because I'm sure he will agree that putting "I'm sure he will agree" in front of a statement doesn't turn it into a question. In response to the first sentence, the local plan follows the procedures set out in the Town and Country Planning Regulations 2012, and we've now reached the stage known as Regulation 19, where the plan is being tested for soundness together with legal compliance. More specifically, the consultation is being undertaken in accordance with the Council's recently adopted Statement of Community Involvement. For example, to date the Council has sent out over 2,000 letters and emails to statutory undertakers, members of the public, businesses and a range of interest groups, and has also made hard copies of the draft plan available at council premises and public libraries across Harlow. Currently we have had 130 expressions of interest, although whether they become representations depends on whether they consider they need to formally respond. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Harlow, do you have a follow-up question?
I do, yes. The meaning was in the second word, the word additional. I'm sure it's been accepted that 120 responses to the Reg 18 consultation was inadequate, especially when Epping, who put quite a lot of effort into engaging with their residents, got over 3,000.
Councillor Harlow, do you have a question?
He's asking his question.
Yes, I'm coming to
Thank you. I'm addressing Councillor Harlow.
He's answering his question.
Can we get on to it?
On the basis that their Reg 19 consultation, which we've just started on, has attracted over 1,000 responses, and here's my question: what do you think is a reasonable response from the Harlow residents? What's your target?
We have no particular target because obviously we're asking people to make representations about the soundness of the plan and the legal compliance of the plan. In that respect, although we welcome expressions of interest, we welcome comments from the public and from stakeholders, the actual level of responses which are in the end formalised is not a measure of how successful the plan is in regards to the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Right, let's move on to item 7, petitions. I'm unaware of any petitions that have been brought to our attention. So we move quickly on to the forward plan, pages 8 to 21 of your pack. Are we happy to note the forward plan?
Noted, Chair.
Oh, Councillor Charles, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Page 12 of the forward plan has a reference to the procurement strategy. Now, of course, all of us are interested in procurement processes of the council, and it particularly shone a light over the waste and recycling contract. My question is simple. Will the lessons learned from the waste and recycling contract be factored into this procurement strategy so that we can learn lessons from the issues that there were, and then actually put a case study into this strategy that actually would enhance the strategy going forward? The vital point here is that I think it's very important to have ongoing learning lessons exercise of the waste and recycling contract because of the procurement process. And the question is, where are we now with the legal discussions between the consultants and the council over who is paying for the extension? Because we were given a guarantee by this council that the public would not be paying for it.
Okay, thank you. So this strategy at the moment is still in draft, and it'll be due out next month, I think, on the plan. So your question will actually be answered then. I can't answer that right this moment. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on the work plan? Good. So, well, I'm moving on.
No, I'm just on the local plan. So obviously this is a regular question advice. On page 12 it references the local development plan. Obviously that's one of the biggest pieces of work that's been ongoing for a number of years now. One of the issues that's recently come up is an internal investigation that Councillor Burton has said officers, not just from this authority, but other local authorities have undertaken regarding a matter of Harlow's local plan and the provisions that we were told in a briefing with Paul McBride and Graham Bloomer on the 19th of January that they were looking from a planning perspective to close Hobbs Course Road. Now, Councillor Harvey and Councillor Burton have been in protracted dialogue with me and another colleague. What I would like to know about this internal investigation, Councillor Burton, because you've involved officers in your political response to Councillor Garnett, what was the remit, what was the cost, how many officers, not just from this authority and that other authorities, were involved, and can you also confirm what was the timeline?
Councillor Charles, can I interrupt you? I don't think that's got anything at all to do with the forward plan, so we'll move on. Thank you.
Chair, for me. It's a question about the local development plan.
Yes, and this is
an internal investigation.
Plan, and I will say that another time. Thank you, Councillor
It is a regular
Charles.
update.
We are moving on.
Okay.
Thank you.
You can answer the question.
Because the question was inappropriate, and we are moving on. Thank you, Councillor Charles. Our next item on the agenda is recent decisions taken by the leader, deputy or portfolio holders. I've not taken any decisions. So we'll move on, but I'm noteworthy. Portfolio holders delegations, pages 22 to 23 to be noted. Councillor Charles again.
Thank you, Chair. I've taken on the shadow of the economic growth portfolio, which I think is an important portfolio. When I was looking at the delegations here, I couldn't see any specifics on the portfolio holders for regeneration and the portfolio holder for economic growth. So I'm interested in what additional responsibilities they will get as part of my own brief on economic growth. But one interesting quote that I've received about the delegations, which is important, I want to read out. Just to make you aware, this is a quote, just to make you aware, I have refused to carry on in any cabinet position at HGC. In essence, Mark has split the role, with 80% now under Emma and 20% remains in the regeneration portfolio. I felt I couldn't work with such a low percentage and felt I couldn't take the allowance. The quote goes on to say, disappointed, annoyed. Those are not my words, those are your Labour colleagues' words. Councillor Tony Durkin, the former regeneration portfolio holder. Is he right?
No, he's not. Thank you. Right, if there are no other questions on the portfolio holder delegations, let's move on to appointments of the Cabinet Overview Working Group, Housing Partnerships. Item 11, which is in your supplementary pack. I do have something to point out on this. Thank you. If you look at the bottom of the second page there, when we come to HTS Property Environment Board of Directors, you'll notice that the Labour 2 directors are listed as Bob Davis and Chris Vince. Now, at the moment, John Strachan is the second director, together with Bob Davis. John is intending to resign on July the 5th, and he will be replaced by Chris Vince. I'd like this to go forward with Chris Vince's name in there. There is an item coming up about HTS, and to avoid any possibility of suggestion that there may be a conflict of interest, John won't be voting on that particular item. Thank you. If they're agreed, we'll move on. And we come to the HTS Group Report on page Cabinet Overview Working Group, pages 24 to 26 work plan.
I second.
Are we agreed with that?
Agreed.
No? Simon.
It's just customary to see if there are any questions before we actually move to the vote. Looking at the Cabinet Overview Working Group plan for 1819, basically there's nothing in it. All we've got are interim and final reports on the ongoing work programme. The only place that could actually put items into the Cabinet Overview Working Group work plan is Cabinet itself. Now, I would have thought, starting off the year, there will be the work plan that we've already seen, which is equally light. And so I'm wondering, really, whether there is a purpose for the overview working group if there's nothing for it to do.
Well, things can be added as we go along. This is the things that are in there now that are left over from last year. So we can carry on, we can add to that from the Cabinet as we carry on. So yes, there is.
So you don't know at the moment?
There will be things added to it as we
You
go
are
along.
hoping something will turn
There
up?
will be things added to it as we go along. Okay.
No, it's not a case of things. Hopefully things will turn up.
Well,
Right.
there's nothing there.
At the moment. Right. So, item 30, the report on the HTS Group 2018 to 2020. I'm going to move that report.
And I formally second, Chair.
Thank you. Cabinets and councillors and members of the public, we're faced with a national housing shortage. Over the last 50 years, the national supply of houses built has been less than half of the demand. This, together with the decimation of council housing stock brought about by Conservative governments that forced councils into sales, while at the same time handcuffing them by not allowing the proceeds to be reinvested into building more housing, has led to an explosion in private rents, many of which are unaffordable and which provide only short-term, insecure tenancies. In Harlow, these Tory policies have resulted in our council housing stock being reduced from a peak of 24,000 to just 9,200 today. 9,200. And that's with a waiting list for 4,095 dwellings. It's clear we simply do not have sufficient council housing to meet demand. The proposals in this report mark an attempt to address this issue in a new way, providing the genuinely affordable and secure housing our town needs. In parts A and B, we set out, in line with the proposals from the 2017-2047 HRA business plan, how we intend to create 14 new dwellings in the years 2018-2019. These dwellings to be delivered by HTS Property and Environment, Harlow's own local authority trading company, so that the Harlow pound is spent in Harlow to the benefit of Harlow businesses, and so that any profits can be reinvested in Harlow for the benefit of Harlow residents. Part C, D and E proposes the creation of a new subsidiary company under HTS Group to be known as HTS Housing and Regeneration, to provide us with the flexibility needed to complete larger house building projects across the town and to enable us to meet the potential we have identified to create 80 new dwellings over the next 3 years and further our ambitious plans beyond them. The LGA chairman, Lord Porter, said, "Our national housing shortage is one of the most pressing issues we face, and as a nation we have no chance of housing supply meeting demand unless councils can build again." Tory MP Nicky Morgan said the potential of local authorities to build should be unleashed. But the Telegraph commented that the measures in the last budget meant to stimulate supply will have only a limited impact on the number of houses that can be built. National Tory government policy continues to fail to deliver that basic human right, decent, affordable, secure housing. Through these measures and others to follow, this Labour Council intends to do what it can to address the problem. We will endeavour to not only continue to provide more and better homes, but more and better homes on long-term tenancies that are truly affordable, giving young people a chance to live independently, families security of tenure so they can bring up their children, and to provide for the elderly so that they can enjoy dignity in retirement. Thank you. Councillor Wilkinson.
I reserve my right. I'll make some comments when we have comments after the questions, Chair.
Any questions?
We've got
Questions?
We've got comments.
Okay, so no questions. I'll move on to comments then, please.
So, after Councillor Wilson.
No, I seconded, so I'll sum it up.
Thank you, Chair. Very tempted to make a lot of sarcastic comments about the 1st of February, but I'll just leave it at well, to laugh or to report a hijacking of a policy. There's so much in here is a lift from our amendment on the 1st of February, that, which was then sort of voted down quite resolutely, so I'm very surprised to see it back. However, I think we are all agreed, there's no doubt about it, there is not enough houses being built. One of the big issues, of course, is where can you build them? And this is obviously what the local plan is about. I'm also pleased to see that the current Labour administration has rejected the Blairite policies of the 90s, when there are 2 years under Blair when only 60 council houses were built in the entire country. That figure has continued, well, it's started to rise in the last 6 years. But trying to blame all ills of the world on Conservative policy is not going to cut the mustard. Labour did not build council houses on Labour, and one of Councillor Wilkinson's predecessors did actually recognise that fact. You say there are over 4,000 people on the waiting list. Well, I have to point out to you, we don't have a waiting list. We've not had a waiting list for very many years. It's a housing needs register. It all depends on the urgency that people require them. Most of the vast majority of people on the housing needs register are already housed, but it may just not be suitable accommodation for them. Obviously, the thrust of the report we obviously welcome, because it's what we proposed in February, and you at that stage were not prepared to embrace. I think the expression used then was it wasn't town-wide. Well, with the resources available to the opposition, it's very difficult to actually drill down into the council's records and plans and proposals to try and identify that, because the officers won't tell us. They can't. So, as I say, it is very welcome. I don't have to declare an interest in being a non-executive director because I'm not a voting member of this committee. But certainly, from the point of view of the HTS group, it is also very welcome, and we look forward to the challenge.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. Any more comments? Councillor Danvers.
Well, I think Simon's comments need to be addressed.
No.
He can be as sarcastic as he likes, but in fact the Tories limited proposal in February was just confined to one area, and that was the area of Old Harlow. The regeneration of the housing stock during the Blair and Brown years, it was deplorable that they didn't actually get on and build houses, but at least they actually regenerated millions of, in fact, in our own programme, in terms of actual decent bathrooms, decent kitchens, all over the country. Sorry, Chair, can I'm going to be heckled. After years of neglect, the Tories, in fact, even stopped council house sales receipts being spent on future council house building, and then they started taking the money to the Treasury. The Tories refused to actually face the fact that 4,000 families at least are in housing need. You can call it what you like. It's a waiting list. People are actually in desperate need of housing. And in those circumstances, we've registered that need, and that need is not being fulfilled in this town alone. It's multiplied by millions. £30 billion of public money goes to private landlords in this country to actually subsidise the private rented sector. It is an absolute disgrace. £30 billion a year would actually buy the housing that we actually need in terms of house building for the whole country. We need to reprioritise, and this local authority clearly is doing that. The last thing is, Chair, I'm sure the officers are embarrassed by what's been said, but the idea that the officers' doors are not open to members of the opposition is quite wrong.
Thank you, Councillor Vanders. Councillor Charles.
Thank you, Chair. The fact of the matter about council houses and who build what is very clear. It's been fact-checked over the years. But under the Conservatives in coalition and now as a single party, over the last near 8 years, more council houses have been built than there were built under the last Labour government. And that's a fact. And you look at the reports and the statistics that have been bandied around, but it has been fact-checked. What I want to say tonight about this report is one clear thing. I think this is a really positive report. And actually, yes, at the full council in February, we set out a statement of intention as a group that we wanted this council to build more council houses. So tonight, in fairness to the Cabinet, they are putting that in motion. And they're putting in motion a Conservative policy to build more council houses. We set out a small programme that had implications town-wide, and it is good news that people will be able to access in years to come good quality, affordable council houses. And that's a priority for all our residents, irrespective of our political colours. Actually, housing is at the forefront of all of our minds.
Thank you. Councillor Wilkinson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, obviously I'll start where Councillor Dowd started, and actually I've got in front of me right now, I've got the Conservative amendment, and Councillor Dowd is quite correct. But just to specify, it wasn't just Old Harlow, they named Chippingfield. They actually had a one-off site which they wanted in their amendment to build council houses. And on a site, by the way, we don't actually own. The numbers didn't stack up. It was just a folly at the time because they wanted to agree with our budget because it was so good. They had nothing to attack, so they come up with a folly of an idea that didn't stack up. Returning to tonight's report, I'm really pleased that this has come to Cabinet. And firstly, I'd like to thank a lot of hard work by the officers, housing officers and other officers involved that spent a long time putting this together. It's a massive step forward for this town and shows you our priorities and our corporate priorities. The Tories, when in power, didn't have housing at the top of their corporate priorities. We do. So I'm pleased that this is coming to tonight. It's very timely. We have ambitious plans for the town. We've got a new local plan, regeneration of the town centre, a garden town development. This report sets out this administration's further thinking on scale and ambition. It recognises the needs to use all available opportunities, maximising investment capacity in order to deliver more and better housing for the town and regeneration. As I've said many times, the council has ambitions to build new homes in all seniors to meet the acute housing need and the beginnings of a programme to do so. Our top priority, and for the administration and myself, is housing. more importantly, building council housing. We are seeking all opportunities to achieve this. I'm keen on the HTS group to expand, and I will go on about that later. This is the right time to do this in support of the council's corporate objectives. I'm also very keen for the council to have greater stewardship role with its companies. We are local representatives with public money, and we have significant challenges to address, which include the development of the local plan, regenerating the town and creating a modern garden village. I've already allocated money within the budget in the short-term initial work to provide additional HRA accommodation, including the conversion and modernisation of properties in Hare Street and Collins Meadow, which I mentioned at the budget back in February. We want to provide more temporary accommodation in Partridge Court to provide an additional unit, and in 2018-19 we'll undertake more work at Summers Farm to provide 6 units, all council building, all for council tenure. In addition, as part of the garage strategy, we will be redevelopment derelict garage sites and commence and prioritising council housing in the short term. I am keen to move forward with this initiative and the further development of our exciting plans. We have to remember that under 4 years of Tory-run Harlow Council, they built 0 council housing. Under our tenure, and my predecessor, Practical Rod Druin, we built the first council houses in this town for 30 years. Something that this administration is very proud of, but we don't want just to stop there. We want to develop, we want to move forward, we want to carry that work on. And I'm also pleased that we're going to do this under the umbrella of HTS. HTS, a success story, a story which the opposition opposed all the way. And I've got a quote from them here. It was an idea that hadn't been thought through properly. Well, a year on, it's an idea that's a success story. It's paid dividends to this town, and it's about time, as we always said many, many years ago, Councillor Ingall's predecessor had the same visions as well, that HTS will not stand alone in P&E. We were always going to develop more umbrella organisations under HTS, and the right place to start is building council housing and improving regeneration in this town. That's our vision. It's going to be... HTS P&E has been a success story, and I've no doubt this new venture will be a success story, and I look forward to years to come of more council housing in this town. Thank you, Chair.
Right, in the absence of any further comments, let's move on to the vote. Do we accept that report?
Agree.
The recommendations of the report. Lovely. Item 14, the safeguarding policy, pages 34 to 57 of your pack.
I'd like to propose a safeguarding policy.
Thank
I move to second this story.
Councillor
Thank you, Chair. I warned the committee I've just recently written my own organisation's safeguarding policy, so there are a couple of questions here just out of interest. The first question I have is looking at the designated safeguarding officer. And please, this is just, if I've read the report wrong, correct me, but it says here that Christine Howard is the DSO. Christine Howard. Yeah? Christine Howard, it says in the, yeah. So that's fine, that's fair enough. Now, in terms of the DSO, given obviously some of the sensitive matters that a safeguarding officer has to deal with, it's a broad spectrum we're going to go into. We all know some of the issues. I've typically seen in organisations where it's a director level or a chief executive role to deal with those sorts of matters. So what is the interplay between the DSO and then the senior management when there's a particularly difficult safeguarding issue? Just be interested in how that interplay works, because if you look at issues around baby P and all the issues there were specific recommendations.
In addition to that, Christine provides an overview to the Senior Management Board on a regular basis, so that we have an overview of anything going on with regards to safeguarding issues in and around Harlow.
That's really helpful. So is the main arbiter on final decisions with safeguarding matters of a serious nature, does that rest with you or the Chief Executive?
The Managing Director.
Fine. Forgive me, the Managing Director, right. The other principle, and it's important for councillors, and I think actually this could be a training element for councillors, and it ties in with staff, is the 3 safeguarding R's. How have you interpreted the 3 safeguarding R's in terms of the process for staff, and then how councillors interact with that? And I have a personal example of this that I'll talk about later. So, to help you, 3 safeguarding R's, I'm sure you know, are recognise, report and record. And how is that fed into this policy? Because I just couldn't make that clear. But I'd be grateful for clarification on that.
I would like to begin answering that question by saying, as I should have said in some remarks, that I was very quick to ask how this document was going to be made live and real for the staff and indeed the members, because the reason for the update is largely to include some very worrying new areas of concern, which I think you'll probably agree it's worth just stating, that they are things like child sexual exploitation, female genital mutilation, forced marriage, honour-based abuse, modern slavery, radicalisation and hoarding. These are issues which are now recognised as very important within the safeguarding agenda, and they weren't in the previous policy, and our new policy has been updated to include them. And I should say that Christine, as well as running training for the staff in greater awareness and understanding of how these issues may present themselves in their work, also is keen to come and speak to members at our group meeting, and will be coming to our group meeting, and I'm sure, well, I know would like to come to yours. In terms of the 3 R's, I'm not familiar with those, but I am familiar with the document, and at the back there is an extensive flow chart, which I'm sure you've seen, which I suspect is a version of the 3 R's in a different sort of terminology perhaps, but I was satisfied that there was a clear pathway for reporting, and indeed the overall message with safeguarding, as I've now learned, is the most important thing is to tell another person. You know, there is a specific person that you should be telling, but within the organisation, do not sit on, even if you've got a flicker of concern, do not sit on it, share that concern, and then with a colleague look at the pathway you should take, or if you should take that further through the organisation. Thank you.
And this brings me on to the more serious question that is important for councillors. Just over a year ago now, I was presented with an issue that was very difficult. It was a piece of casework, and it was a serious safeguarding issue. And in the mix of that safeguarding issue was a problem over consent, particularly when people are mentally incapacitated, particularly when people are vulnerable adults or children, and the test around the public interest. If there's a significant safeguarding issue and involves someone in a vulnerable state that's not able to give consent into the process, this is something that I've grappled with, I know other organisations have had to struggle with. What is the council's process for dealing with those issues where someone is either mentally incapacitated or not able to give consent into the process, and how would you follow that through? Because for councils, if we're presented with a safeguarding issue, it's incredibly difficult for us. What I did is I phoned straight away through to the senior management, raised it, and it was dealt with appropriately. But I think in this circumstance, we could all be presented with something like that, and I think this is where there needs to be specific training for us, and of course staff as well.
Well, I think we should note that point, and thank you for it.
Yep. Any other questions, please? We move on to the debate now. What are you going to say?
Yeah, as you all know, I am a nurse and I do deal with safeguarding vulnerable adults and children. It's very important, like Councillor Harvey said, if you suspect anything or anything's happening, you report it. You go to one of the senior officers and they will deal with it. In a lot of cases, even the senior officers will have social services involved. So all that will be in your training anyway. So we will get, or make sure we'll get all the proper training so we know what we've got to do. So it's a very, very good policy, and we have to make sure we apply this. And it's for equality for everybody as well, because they are children, the most vulnerable.
Thank you. There are no other comments. Are we happy to accept the recommendations of that report?
Agreed.
So now we move on to item 15, the award of the contract for the replacement of the roof covering and associated works to units at the Latin Bush Centre.
I'm proposing that, Chair.
Thank you,
And I formally second it, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. If there are no questions, are we agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed, thank you. Item 16, the Employment Memorandum of Understanding, pages 61 to 88 of your pack.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, this is part of the local plan process. It relates to employment. This is a memorandum of understanding that's been reached with our partner authorities, and obviously we will need to sign up to it because it demonstrates that we're working together to achieve the objectives in the market area, or as it's called, FEMA. Now, I would just like to emphasise the fact that we're not actually providing jobs. We have to identify the number of jobs that are likely to come forward in this area, and that is a very specialist consultancy that's providing these figures. I have to say a lot of councillors have their own queries about how the figures are calculated, but nevertheless it's a technical process that's been delivered, been completed, and the figures are in the report. Our goal in terms of the local plan is to ensure that, having identified the number of different types of jobs that are likely to be coming into this area, we provide the opportunities in terms of land and other means of assistance in order to make those jobs become available. In other words, you have to make sure there's enough employment land available and all the other different ways in which we can assist the process. So this has been agreed with our partner authorities, and I hope we can approve it tonight. Thank you, Chair.
Agreed.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Harlow, do you have a question?
I have two questions. First one's on timing. Obviously, the group of local authorities in East Bourne, East Hertfordshire have already submitted their local plan, and it's gone through the IP. So it seems that this is a little bit late for them. Is there a reason why it's come forward quite late?
Well, actually, strangely enough, one of the reasons was that East Herts had difficulty in finding the necessary employment land to satisfy the figures. In fact, there was some discussion about whether we would assist them in that regard. In the end, we've come to an arrangement about, because obviously these numbers apply to the whole area, the whole market area, and the question of how many jobs are allocated to which district is a matter of debate, and it's a matter of negotiation. And I would say the reason why it's come this late is because it's taken this long to arrive at a satisfactory arrangement between the districts.
My second question also relates to timing, in that the very final appendix talks about the creation of a Garden Town Board. Do you have any idea when that might happen? I mean, obviously coordination with the four authorities and all the projects is absolutely crucial.
Well, again, strangely enough, I had a meeting today with the director of the Garden Town project, and there is a meeting of the embryo Garden Town Board on Monday evening, which has been meeting monthly for around six to 8 months. That has, if you like, developed out of the duty to cooperate. And we will be on Monday discussing the governance arrangements for the Garden Town Board in order to formalise it as a functioning delivery vehicle. One of the issues that's going to be discussed on Monday, and I can bring this to this meeting because it's now in a published agenda, is that we're considering on Monday whether we should have an independent chair of the board, which is would be a paid position, and a number of important stakeholders, because at the moment the board is simply councillors and their officers. They're to be brought onto the board important stakeholders representing education facilities in the town, health facilities and other important stakeholders who have a role to contribute towards the development of the Garden Town. So probably by the autumn, when all these different proposals are actually implemented, we should have a proper functioning business type board for the Garden Town. It will take the Garden Town project a huge step forward. Thank you.
Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on something Councillor Burton mentioned in his question to Councillor Harlow's first question. He mentioned about he mentioned the reason that we were behind was because of he starts sort of negotiating over how much employment land they would have, if I quickly remember what you said, and there was a negotiation. I wondered what proportion of that employment land had been negotiated between the different authorities. If you can give us an update on that figure.
Strangely enough, I don't carry those figures around with me. All I can say to you is that the East Herts, having gone forward, as Councillor Harlow pointed out, ahead of the other three districts, then found that the report which brought forward the numbers for job creation exceeded what they had allowed for, and therefore we had to have a discussion. But if you want, I can, in fact, in the report, it actually identifies the consultants' figures. If you look in there, you'll see what the figures are.
Sorry, so the proportion being in the consultants' bit. Is that what you're saying? Because it's,
yes, the consultants, Hardisty Jones, obviously are specialists in employment planning issues, and if you follow the link in the report, you'll get all the figures and the allocations to different districts and so on. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, if I may, because I think it's a very important point that we understand as the council how much of employment land is. Yeah, it's a very important thing. We want, obviously, as many jobs as we can to come to Harlow, much opportunity and stuff like. I can go and look in the report, but would it be good for Cabinet to be updated on that kind of percentage, actually, without having to go in to find it through various links and things, just as a information, really, just to make Cabinet aware of those sorts of things?
We can send an email out to you or giving you that information. It's not a problem.
Thank you very much.
Any further questions on that? Any further questions on that memorandum of understanding?
Just to say, look on page 62 of the report, it gives you the figures. 51,000 jobs, 10 to 24 hectares of employment land for different requirements, 68 hectares for employment land for industrial requirements, and then
yeah, no, that's across the whole piece. I want to know what proportion is coming to Harlow. That's what
we'll get that to you. Right, are there any comments on this? No? Right, do we accept the recommendations of this memorandum of understanding?
Great.
Thank you. Let's move on now, please, to the next item, which is 17, communications from committees, working groups, plans, a referral from Cabinet Overview Working Group. Who's moving that motion?
I am.
I'm seconding it.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I welcome this report and the work that has been put into it, and I'm pleased to hear it's up and running. What I'd like to ask is, what positive action can the Council take to promote a healthy lifestyle through planning?
That's, I think, an excellent point, and something I'm very new to the portfolio, as you know, and one of the questions that I had when we were talking about it was, particularly with Maureen, who, as you know, is very, very passionate about this, how do we embed this not just as a standalone policy, but in everything we do? And that's a conversation which I've only just begun to have, but I very much agree with you that this can't be something which we do in isolation. It should be part of planning. It should be part of all the core council functions. So I hear you.
Councillor Charles.
On page 114, we have presented the actions and outcomes as part of the Capital Building strategy. Particular area of interest to me, Councillor Harlow, as you become aware of over the years, is our ageing population and the challenges with that. The issues that we have outside of London, the highest population of 90-year-olds. Obviously social care is a particular issue. But when I come to page 114 and some of the outcomes presented in it, it talks about increased dementia awareness, and something that Councillor Livings was talking about, minimising the risk of people becoming prone to slips, trips and falls, and that's planning and planning our communities so that we reduce these hazards for an elderly population. What are your thoughts about engaging charities, the great work that our local charities do to help promote dementia awareness, and then where do you see your work going in terms of the planning aspect of this? I know you're new to the role, but have you got some early thoughts on that?
I haven't got many early thoughts as yet, other than to say I have had the thought that this needs to be broader than a strategy that sits in isolation, so I agree with that. And secondly, that this is very much a partnership policy, a plan. You know, it is being delivered completely and utterly in partnership. In fact, it only exists in partnership. So working with groups is absolutely at the heart of it. And I note what you say and note your particular interest in being, as we both are in Old Harlow, where we have a sizable elderly population. I share those concerns. Thank you.
Any further questions? Comments? Is that? Yeah.
Well, look, first of all, I welcome any action to look at how we can address some of the health and wellbeing challenges in Harlow, and that's a given. I think across political parties that's really important. One of the areas of interest of mine is an ageing population, given my work in the third sector, and Harlow is unique in the challenges that are presented by that. And what we've tried to explore in some of the questioning this evening is how we can address some of those fundamental challenges. On the back of some of my questions at earlier Cabinet meetings, I'm pleased and I welcome the fact that the Council have put in, as one of the outcomes, some work to address loneliness and social isolation amongst older people. I'm granted from what Councillor Durkin said during that exchange, of course it's young people as well that may face loneliness and social isolation. These matters are real big fundamental problems in 21st century online communities, the engagement people have, but people still feel lonely, irrespective of their age, and that's something I think the Council can take a leadership role on. When you look at some of the facts and figures at the start of this report, they make for very grim reading. There are some positives. People, it seems, are addressing some of their issues with substance misuse. There are some good news over the quality of our schools, and that should always be at the forefront of our minds, but we've still got more work to do in those areas. And equally, employment. I think when we look at employment, we've not just got to look at the qualifications people have, but some of the success stories in this town of white van man, the traders that have a very successful career, and how we recognise those people that are, you know, the small entrepreneurs that are making a big difference to our local economy. Taken in the round, this report explores some of the key issues, some of the challenges that are presented in the next 10, 20 years and so on, decades to come. But what I want to see, and I appreciate what Councillor Harvey has said, that actually we've got to put more meat on the bones. There are particular projects that will stream out of this strategy, and I very much hope that the administration and the council takes this strategy by the scruff of the neck and actually tries to have a leadership role in dealing with some of these broader quality issues.
Thank you, Councillor Charles. Councillor Hall.
This is a really good start so that we can make sure the community get together. As a equality and diversity portfolio holder, I'm already started talking to groups so that we can make sure we find out who are the people out there who need the most help. Like Councillor Charles mentioned, loneliness, not just for old people but for young people. There's not enough activities going on in this town. So that's part of my role, and I will be working with Councillor Harvey to make sure we make this community get together, because there's a lot of segregation and isolation. But at the same time, having more council houses built better community, people start getting better homes, their health feel better because it's for long-term tenancy, so they don't have to worry about whether they're going to move next or their kids have to move school. So all that counts in the well-being. And mental health, homelessness, so everything does count. So I'm going to work with Councillor Harvey to make sure we apply and make sure people get what they deserve in this town.
Thank you, Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. I've been working with Rainbow Services for nearly 4 years. Where this is on the aid well side, basically. I run a weekly club where we meet and have coffee and tea and have lunches and things like that. The Rainbow Services, starting from zero, there are 220 people a week attend the club in Harlow. It's really going from strength to strength. Apart from that, to reduce social isolation, they have safe and social events where it covers people like learning not to fall over, preparation against trips and falls, information from the police, information from the health services, and also it's normal talking to people get involved, they bring in singers, they arrange trips to the seaside, trips to places like Cambridge or Chelmsford, and trips on the canal boats. So lots of people are engaged with that. A lot of money's been spent and a lot of effort's been put in. And I'm pleased to say that's actually happening. It is supported in some way by officers of the council, and I think it's been delivered very well. So there is something being done. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome this report, as does Councillor Charles and Roberts. I think, as we said, any effort to address these issues is welcomed, and certainly the one thing I just would like to just sort of say going forward is it can be easy to be very negative about a lot of these issues. And like Councillor Davis just said, there's a lot of good that's already going on. So we must be cognizant of that as we go forward, because there are lots of charitable sectors, voluntary groups that are doing a lot of great work out there, and we must be sure that we don't always set off on the negative foot. I think one of the big issues is breaking down the barriers for engagement. Because as we've said, there are things out there, but sometimes when people become lonely and isolated, they don't know how to access those things. So sometimes it's not the want of trying, it's breaking down those barriers to isolation. So yes, like my colleague, I welcome the report, and I think there are lots of positive things already going on out there, and we should see it as a way of making it even better. If we want to big up Harlow and promote it, we need to be going forward with the positives, but saying we can always do better.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you for that. And I just wanted to say that last week we had a small celebration for the volunteers that work for a number of the council services. So the volunteers that are the ushers at the playhouse, volunteers in the town park, volunteers at Liam Manning, all sorts of services that the council is responsible for. And it was very, very, very uplifting, and I just wanted to dovetail on what you were saying, that there is much to celebrate and many people doing wonderful things in the town. And I think giving this new strategy gives us an opportunity to shine a light in some respects on what is already happening, and then to use that to amplify it and encourage others to participate. So, thank you.
Thank you. Are we happy to accept the recommendations of the working group?
Okay, great.
Thank you. So let's now move on to item 18, the minutes of panels and working groups. A, the minutes of the meeting on Thursday the 5th of April, the Harlow's Local Highways panel.
Chair, could I just make a point? Could I just draw members' attention to, on page 124, that our pressure over many years has finally paid off, in that it's been agreed that the disgraceful junction at roundabout at Northgate, 4th Avenue, is going to be replaced in the new scheme. Of course, what we have to do now is to make sure it actually happens. For years we've been told that nothing could be done, but finally it's been agreed something is going to be done, and hopefully done as soon as possible. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. I'm sure we're all very pleased about that. Can we note this and move on?
No.
Thank you. The minutes of the meeting on Thursday the 12th of April, the Cabinet Overview Working Group. Noted. Good. Item 19. Are there any matters of urgent business? No? Lovely. So, I call the meeting to a close. Thank you.